There's a meme currently going around social media that says, in 1,000 years, people won't know the difference between a butt dial and a booty call. And that's why interpreting the Bible is difficult. It's a brilliant meme. Very rarely do you get something so short and pithy and to the point. We do not understand the cultural references 2,000 years ago unless we really do the work. This is what the meme is suggesting. And the scripture we have today needs some unpacking. On the surface, it looks very, very simple. But if you dig down a little bit, it's not at all, which kind of tells scholars that this is an original teaching of Jesus. This isn't something that the writers of Matthew put in 50 years later. Well, as I was preparing for this sermon, I did a lot of study, and I saw everything from quasi-Marxian theory analysis that was trying to tear apart the image of laborers in the labor market vis-a-vis the rich, to allegory, which is a traditional way of interpreting this scripture that goes back to the early Middle Ages, where the rich landowner is God, the people are the followers, those who come are always welcome. I mean, the analogy is easy to assess, but the scripture itself doesn't lend itself easily to either interpretation. And that's where we have to kind of root and dig a little bit. On the surface, it's a beautiful story, especially for those who came late, that everybody who comes to the kingdom, everybody who is welcomed by God to come be laborers in the kingdom, is going to receive equal. And those who shown up first, kind of like the prodigal son and his older brother, those who show up first are not guaranteed more. Now, that's a really earthly value, and it's very hard to kind of get our heads around something that doesn't comply with how we understand work. Even in our churches, we are completely agog with traditional families that have been there for generations, and they hold sway. They take their power and they like it and they want to run with it. And anybody newbie who comes into the congregation is put under the microscope and assessed whether or not they're worthy based on what the older families look like. And families will talk. I've been here for so long. My grandfather did this, that, and the next thing. My grandmother was chair of this, that, and the next thing. And it intimidates a new person. Our churches are nowhere near what the image of the kingdom of heaven is supposed to look like. So let's unpack it a little bit. So Jesus says the kingdom is like. For any of you who are familiar with the year-round Christmas carol, I've mentioned it before in the past, but when Jean Brebeuf came to Canada and he wanted to explain the the Bethlehem story to the Huron, he put it in their languages. It wasn't shepherds, it was warriors. It wasn't God, it was Gitche Manitou. It was changing to make it accessible to the culture of the day. And Jesus' parables are full of that. You couldn't tell first century peoples about a world that only 15th century or 21st century people lived because they'd have no reference. They'd have no grasp of that. So he spoke to them in a world that they understood. And they understood economic exploitation. And they understood graduated payment for labor. And they understood waiting around, and perhaps the laborers who were the poorest of society might not get paid. That means they might not eat. This was normal. If you were a family who had a craft or a license from their own government, for instance, for fishing or farming or something else, you had land, you had more economic security than day laborers. So the day laborers that Jesus is talking about are the absolute lowest rung of society in an economic sense. And he creates this parable that is accessible. And you might have had a whole lot of people hearing this for the first time saying, thank God I'm not one of them, or preserve my children from ever becoming one of them, or I'm glad we're no longer part of them because we married well, or luck have it, we were able to get a license, or whatever else. No one wanted to be the day laborers, and Jesus knew that. Much like today, no one wants to be the day laborers that we know around the world. We kind of ignore their existence, but they're still here. They haven't gone away. This is not just a first century phenomenon. So he took the lowest in society, the lowest on the economic rung, and a rich landowner who would have been one of the highest on the rungs. And he said, I am looking for workers. And through the day, numerous times, at dawn, at 9, at noon, at 3, at 5, he went out looking for people. Why aren't you working? Now, normally what would have happened is that the landowner would have sent one of his servants into the market, grab the best that he could find, take them back. Maybe if they needed more because it was rushed at the end of the day, they might have gone back to the market and seen what was left. But that generally wasn't what happened. But this owner went himself to the market and hired people and continued to hire people through the day and hired people at the very end of the day. So there's just 1 hour of work left. This would have been fantastical for Jesus' audience. They would not have had this experience in real life. It just didn't happen that way. And yet here's the story. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like this, because the kingdom of heaven is not our expectations. It's not how we understand the world to work. And that's something that Jesus was constantly trying to explain to his followers, and through his followers to us 2,000 years later, because we're still not really getting that there is a way to live different from what we know. And then at the end of the day, the worker who has been there the longest gets really affronted, because he was thinking that if the day laborers who were hired last got the wage, surely he was going to get something more. That makes sense in a world where money is the focus. The worker was well within their rights to complain. Like, wait a minute, I've been here for hours. I've put in 12 hours, they've put in 1. Why am I not paid 12 times what they're being paid? And the landowner says, I'm giving you what we agreed upon, which sounds like a really nasty kind of response. It's hard to hear for those of us who have been in church land forever, that the newest are going to receive just as much of a share as we are. There's a proprietarian sense of our being here. Like, we've been here all along. Why are these new converts getting the same amount of attention? It wrangles a lot of people who've been there. I hear it when I'm leading worship in various congregations. The classic way is, well, we've never done it that way before. Well, maybe you haven't, but it might attract new people and make them feel more comfortable, so we're going to try this. And those who've been there forever sometimes have a huff and they leave because it's no longer catering to their wants and needs. There is no promise in the kingdom of heaven that we are going to have our desires met exclusively. That was never part of the promise. Part of our challenge as Christians is to really wrestle with what it means to be equal. It's really easy to say, and it's really easy to sing the songs and do the prayers and take the initiative and make yourself feel like you are doing the work of the kingdom. But are we really? That's a question we constantly have to ask ourselves. I was at a meeting for a social justice group that's been in existence since 70s or 80s, and I met a friend of mine who was part of it, and I was looking at the aging population that was attending. There was no one even close to my age, let alone younger. And I said to this friend of mine, I said, these are the same people that were here in the 80s. And he said, I know. I said, no, these are the same people who were here in the 80s. And he said, yeah, I know. This organization was surviving based on the needs and the desires of people who had aged. But they weren't attracting anybody new. They weren't pulling in. In fact, when I talked to a couple of people about why they were not part of this organization, their response is, it doesn't speak to me. It doesn't seem to do anything or say anything. That is the reality of our church currently, our institutional churches. We are not listening to what other people have to say and what they're looking for and they're asking for. The people who came at 5 o'clock in the market had just as much right to the benefits of work as those who'd been there since dawn. Those of us who have been here the longest are not special. We don't earn more of a keep just because we are traditionally identified as Christian. Everybody has a say, and perhaps the takeaway this morning is not a quasi-Marxist interpretation of labor exploitation, nor is it a simple allegory to make it beautiful and excuse it away and keep it light and superficial. Maybe the takeaway is, as a community of faith who is trying, who claims to try anyway, to be bringing Jesus' kingdom here on earth, maybe we have to stop paying attention to those who think they deserve the larger share and start paying attention to the needs and wants of those who come late in the day, because those are the ones who actually need our nurture, who need our attention. If you're a cradle Christian, you've got a whole lot of culture behind you. If you are a newcomer to the faith, you don't have that culture. Or conversely, you have such a negative version of Christianity that you are more like the first century Christians who were trying to follow Jesus while their families attacking them for the ideology. Who are we in this parable is a really important question. But let's try to take a bit of all interpretations and pay attention to those who might need more, because at the end of the day, the workers who had been standing around stressed, thinking they weren't going to eat today, and suddenly this incredible thing happened to them and they were given an opportunity to get their basics covered. Maybe that is exactly the people that we as traditional Christians should be paying attention to. Those who've been here forever have always taken care of each other. Now it's time for us to do something different and start to pay attention to those who are new to the community. It's our responsibility to show and teach those who've just shown up, because they get as much as we do, but they can also get something from us too. It doesn't just have to be from the landowner.